Looking at our most recent encounters we've built, from a robot murder house where you have to question the morality of how evil is too evil to be forgiven, to having the players decide whether or not they should euthanize a child right in front of their father, well, they've been a little dark. So the goal of today's encounter is to purely make an awesome combat experience that doesn't require any build-up to be fun and engaging. But more specifically, we will make a combat encounter that is continuously engaging despite it potentially lasting for more than several rounds. Hello, my name is Matt and welcome to My Hidden Nerdy Side, a channel created by a nerd who doesn't have many nerdy friends, and so I must rant to you. And today, we're tackling the incarnations of fire, water, earth, and air. Elementals. We're going to take a look at their lore, info, and abilities, and then build an encounter you can steal, modify, and plop straight into your D&D games. Now, if you are well aware of the lore and mechanics behind elementals, then feel free to pop on over to the timestamp right here so you can jump straight to the encounter itself. I'll leave a clickable version in the description below. Alright, let's take a look at elementals. To make sure this video is a decent length, we'll only be pulling the elemental lore, info, and abilities that exist within the monster manual, all of which can be found on pages 123 to 125. So as we said in the intro, elementals are incarnations of the four major elements: fire, earth, wind, and water. On its home plane, an elemental is nothing more than a bodiless life force. They have no society or culture, and no desire other than to course through the element of its native plane. It's only when it's summoned or manipulated by magic that it takes on a physical form. Through spells, magic items, or other magical means, elementals are summoned from their home plane to the material plane. Naturally, they don't like being yanked from their homes and made to serve, so any creature that summons an elemental must force them to do their bidding. Powerful magic can turn an elemental into different forms to serve a very specific function. For example, air elementals can be turned into invisible stalkers, water elementals can be turned into water weirds, etc. And how powerful that magic is and the type of materials that bind an elemental determines how strong and how useful any elemental is. Now, looking at their actions and abilities, which can also be found on pages 124 to 125 of the monster manual, there is a lot to go through. Since there are 4 stat blocks, we're just going to go over what makes each elemental unique. Being made of wind, air elementals are incredibly fast, can fit through tiny spaces, and can even be in the same space as another creature. And in addition to physical damage from non-magical weapons, they are also resistant to lightning and thunder damage. But its really fun ability is whirlwind. If a creature shares the same space as an air elemental, they must make a strength saving throw or be tossed 20 feet in a random direction and fall prone. The target can also take additional damage if they collide with a wall or another similar object, and it can even damage and knock other creatures prone if they collide with them. Looking at earth elementals, they have a higher AC than the others but are vulnerable to thunder damage and have less condition immunities. However, they have 60 feet of tremor sense, deal double damage against objects and structures, and can burrow through any non-magical unworked earth and stone without disturbing the material. On to fire elementals, they are the only elemental with an additional damage immunity, which is naturally fire. They too can fit through tiny spaces and deal fire damage to anyone they touch and to anyone who hits them with a melee weapon attack. They also shed bright light in a 30-foot radius and dim light for an additional 30 feet. And for every 5 feet the elemental moves in water, or for every gallon splashed on it, it takes 1 cold damage. And finally, we have water elementals. In addition to their other resistances, they are resistant to acid and can also fit through small spaces. Cold damage freezes them, which reduces their speed by 20 feet, and they are very fast while in the water. They also have a whelm ability, which allows them to overwhelm their targets with torrents of water, restraining them and making the target unable to breathe. Okay, so now that we've gone over the basic elemental lore, info, and abilities, let's start crafting an encounter. This encounter/quest will be aimed at parties level 7 to 11 depending on how difficult you want to make it, and last only 1 combat-filled session. We're also going to skip the party's motivation for this particular encounter since it will entirely be about the combat. All you need to make this encounter work is a world where a Colosseum-esque arena could exist. And to be honest, you don't even really need that, but it's where we're going to stage this encounter. So your party has agreed, for whatever reason, to participate in this battle arena. When they walk into the arena and have all the fans either cheering or booing them, it will be just a typical empty sandpit. Or at least, it will look like a typical empty sandpit. But when the fight begins, an air, earth, fire, and water elemental will be summoned into the pit, and the ground beneath the players will start to change. What will it change into? That will be determined by a random roll of the die. Roll a d4 and assign a number to each of the elementals. We'll say 1 is air, 2 is earth, 3 is fire, and 4 is water. Depending on what you roll, the ground will change into an environment that suits the designated elemental. You will roll this d4 at the start of every single turn, meaning your players will be fighting in an ever-changing battlefield for the entire combat. When the environment changes, it will either buff the elementals or debuff the party. On top of that, the elemental linked to that environment gains additional buffs. All buffs and debuffs will disappear once the environment changes, and once any of the elementals die, their corresponding environment is taken out of the d4 rotation. Let's start with the air elemental environment. The ground turns into an open field and the air becomes foggy, causing all the players to have a -3 to all weapon attacks and spell attacks. The air elemental will grow from large to huge, gain an additional d8 of damage to its slam attacks, and will be able to use Misty Step as a bonus action. On top of that, on the first slam attack to hit its target, the creature must make a DC 14 con save or take an additional 1d8 lightning damage, and be stunned until the start of the air elemental's next turn. Now let's go on to the earth elemental environment. The arena will turn into a rocky desert filled with large stones and broken pillars. Some of these rocks will start to swirl around the elementals and block incoming attacks, causing the AC of all elementals to increase by 2. The earth elemental will grow from large to huge and push any creatures out of the way to do so. It will gain an additional d8 of damage to its slam attacks, dealing an additional 1d8 bludgeoning damage and knocking the target prone on a failed DC 14 strength save. In addition, at the start of its turn, the earth elemental will shoot 3 large rocks from its head, targeting 3 creatures of its choice within 60 feet of it. The targets must make a DC 14 dex save or take 2d8 bludgeoning damage. Now let's hop over to the fire elemental environment. The ground will turn into volcanic rock, and the heat will heavily intensify. All players must make a DC 14 con save or gain 1 level of exhaustion. The fire elemental will grow from large to huge and gain an additional d6 of damage to its touch attacks. On top of that, the fire elemental will gain a breath attack, stretching out in a 15-foot cone. Every target must make a DC 14 dex save or take 4d6 fire damage and be set on fire. Use the same rules as its fire form for how the targets take damage from being set on fire and how they can douse the flames. Creatures who succeed take half damage and are not set on fire. And finally, let's look at the water elemental environment. The environment will turn into a desert oasis with many pockets of water throughout the battlefield. Players will fall into the water if they are unlucky enough to be in a spot where water spawns, but all elementals will hover over them if they choose. The water elemental will grow from large to huge and gain an additional d8 of damage to its slam attacks. It can also choose one of its slam attacks to be a freezing strike, dealing an additional 2d8 of cold damage and causing the target to have their speed reduced by 20 feet until the start of the water elemental's next turn. The damage is reduced by half and their speed isn't reduced at all on a successful DC 14 con save. And on top of all that, the water elemental can control the water near one creature, causing the water to form small waves that move the target up to 30 feet closer to it. All you need is one of each elemental, and a simple way to run this encounter at higher levels is to just make the elementals the Myrmidon versions of themselves, which can be found on pages 202 to 203 of Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. But with the ever-changing environment, new mechanics coming in every round, and a series of buffs and debuffs your party has to deal with, this encounter will surely keep your players engaged and excited the entire length of combat. So, a combat encounter where the environment is always shifting and continues to stay engaging even though it lasts longer than usual? I think this encounter is spicy enough, but can we make it even spicier? This time, I'm going to leave that entirely up to you. But of course, this is just one of many ways you can use elementals in your Dungeons & Dragons campaign. There are tons of different ways to take this encounter and spice it up, so please let me know what you would do in the comment section below so I can nerd out over it and smack myself on the head for not thinking of it. Also, let me know if there are any creatures that you would like me to build an encounter for in my future videos. I'm going to try and put out at least one of these videos a week, so feel free to subscribe and share this video around if you liked it, and stay tuned for upcoming content. Thanks for watching and indulging my hidden nerdy side.